4 arrows. That was the price of a royal life. The first pierced her shoulder, the second her thigh, the third her ribs. But the fourth found her spine as she shielded the crying boy. When the Alpha King finally arrived, the winter snow was no longer white. Within the towering, frost-kissed walls of Iron Ridge Keep, Callie Hughes was little more than a ghost. Born to a disgraced infantryman who had perished in exile, she bore the invisible stain of her father's failures. Among the hierarchy of the werewolf pack, she was relegated to the lowest rung, a scullery maid, sweeping stone floors, tending to the hearths, and, on occasion, watching over the young pup of the Alpha King. King Cedric Alden was a myth of a man, carved from ice and grief. He had lost his Luna in childbirth 5 years prior, leaving him with a heart of stone and a single, precious heir. Little Leo. Cedric ruled with an iron fist, his towering presence commanding absolute submission. He barely knew the names of his lower servants, and to him, Callie was merely a quiet blur of drab wool and lowered eyes, someone who blended into the shadows of his massive medieval fortress. It was the night of the winter solstice. The great hall was alive with roaring fires, roasting meats, and the raucous laughter of warriors celebrating the longest night of the year. The heavy oak doors were sealed against the biting blizzard outside. Inside, the ale flowed freely, and even the sternest generals let down their guard. But the noise was too much for 5-year-old Leo. The boy possessed a sensitive spirit, frightened by the booming voices of the drunken beta wolves and the overwhelming sense of the feast. Beatrice, the aging head of the servants, had shoved the small boy toward Callie. "Take him to the outer courtyards. Walk him through the glasshouse gardens until he settles. The king is deep in council with the visiting lords and cannot be disturbed." Callie had nodded silently, wrapping the young prince in a thick fur mantle before leading him out the heavy side doors. The air outside was a brutal shock of ice, but the glasshouse, a massive wrought iron structure heated by underground thermal vents, was a sanctuary of blooming winter roses and fragrant damp earth. Leo clung to Callie's hand, his small fingers cold despite his gloves. "Will father come to say goodnight?" Leo asked, his voice trembling slightly in the quiet, echoing space. "The king is very busy, little one," Callie whispered softly, kneeling to adjust his furs. She smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened her usually guarded features. "But he loves you more than the moon loves the night sky." The words had barely left her lips when the glass ceiling shattered. It didn't happen with a roar, but with a horrifying, crystalline crash. Shards of glass rained down like jagged diamonds. Callie's instincts, suppressed by years of submissive conditioning, screamed to life. She grabbed Leo by his tunic, yanking him under the sturdy iron frame of a potting table just as heavy boots crunched onto the gravel path behind them. Assassins, human mercenaries mingled with rogue wolves, their scents masked by heavy doses of deadened ash and rotting pine. They hadn't come for the king. They had bypassed the Great Hall entirely. They had come to end the Alden bloodline. "Find the pup!" a raspy voice barked, the sound accompanied by the terrifying snap of a heavy crossbow being loaded. Callie didn't think. She didn't weigh her miserable life against the worth of royalty. She only saw a terrified 5-year-old boy whose mother was gone and whose father was too far away. Scooping Leo into her arms, she bolted. She exploded from the rear doors of the glass house, sprinting into the blizzard-swept courtyard. The snow was knee-deep, pulling at her boots like quicksand. She couldn't shift into her wolf form. A wolf could not carry a child with hands, and letting Leo run on his own meant certain death. She remained in her fragile human skin, clutching the boy to her chest, covering his head with her own body. Thwack! The sound of the crossbow string snapping echoed through the howling wind. A heartbeat later, white-hot agony exploded in Callie's left shoulder. The heavy, silver-tipped bolt tore through her flesh and shattered her collarbone. A strangled gasp ripped from her throat, but she didn't stop. She bit through her bottom lip, tasting copper, and forced her legs to keep churning through the snow. "Keep running." The guard towers. Just reach the guard towers. Thwack. The second arrow found her right thigh. The impact was like the kick of a warhorse, sending her sprawling forward. She twisted in midair, taking the brunt of the fall on her own bruised body so Leo wouldn't be crushed. The boy screamed, a piercing, terrified sound that finally cut through the howling winds, a sound that would undoubtedly reach the sensitive ears of the wolves in the great hall. "Callie! Callie! You're bleeding!" Leo sobbed, his small hands clutching her face. "I have you, Leo. I have you," she rasped, her vision swimming with black spots. The pain in her leg was blinding, but the heavy footsteps of the assassins were closing in. She forced herself up, dragging her useless leg, limping forward with the boy crushed against her heart. The third arrow took her in the side, sliding between her ribs. She choked, a spray of blood misting the white snow. Her knees buckled. She collapsed near the base of the stone stairs leading to the king's private armory. She couldn't walk anymore. The mercenaries stepped out of the blizzard, their faces hidden behind dark leather masks. The leader slowly raised his crossbow, aiming directly at the sobbing boy in Callie's arms. With the absolute last fraction of her strength, Callie rolled over, throwing her entire body over the Alpha King's heir. She buried his face in her chest, wrapping her arms and legs around him like an impenetrable shield of flesh and bone. Thwack! The fourth arrow struck her squarely in the back, driving deep into her spine. Callie's world shattered into a silent, white void. She didn't feel the snow anymore. She didn't feel the cold. All she could feel was the frantic, beating heart of the little boy beneath her. Alive. Alive! She let out one final, shuddering breath, and her eyes rolled back into her head. The doors of the great hall were blown off their iron hinges. Alpha King Cedric Alden erupted into the blizzard, his massive, midnight black wolf form tearing through the courtyard like a god of vengeance. The scent of rogue wolves, strange humans, and the overwhelming, terrifying metallic tang of his son's blood had snapped him out of the council meeting. Behind him, his beta, Silas Croft, and a dozen elite guards poured into the night. Cedric decimated the assassins in a matter of seconds. Jaws crushed skulls, claws tore through armor and flesh. The mercenaries barely had time to scream before the Alpha King reduced them to torn ribbons on the snow. But the slaughter brought Cedric no satisfaction. His glowing golden eyes desperately scanned the courtyard until they landed on the blood-soaked mound at the base of the armory steps. He shifted back to his human form mid-stride, not caring about his nakedness in the freezing cold, and dropped to his knees. The sight before him made the Alpha King, a man who had waded through rivers of blood in the territorial wars, stop breathing. A young woman lay face down in the snow. Her back resembled a gruesome pincushion. 4 thick, black-fletched arrows protruding from her small frame. The snow in a 10-foot radius was soaked in a horrifying, vibrant red. "Leo," Cedric choked out, his hands trembling as he reached for the girl's lifeless body. He terrified to move her, terrified of what he would find underneath. With agonizing care, Cedric gripped the girl's uninjured arm and gently rolled her off. Little Leo took a gasping breath, covered head to toe in blood. But as Cedric desperately patted his son down, wiping the crimson from the boy's face, he realized the truth that brought a sharp, burning sting of tears to his eyes. Not a single drop of the blood belonged to his son. The boy was completely, entirely unharmed. "Papa," Leo wailed, throwing his arms around Cedric's neck. But the boy didn't cling to his father. He immediately turned, his tiny fingers pointing at the mangled woman on the ground. "Help her. Papa, help Callie. She wouldn't let them touch me." Cedric looked down at the girl. Her face was deathly pale, her lips tinged blue. He recognized her then. Callie, the quiet maid, the daughter of the disgraced soldier. She had taken 4 killing blows meant for his bloodline. "Silas," Cedric roared, a sound that shook the very foundations of the keep. The beta rushed forward, tossing a heavy cloak over Cedric's shoulders. "My king, get Dr. Pendleton, now. If she dies, I will execute every guard on duty tonight," Cedric bellowed. He didn't wait for his men. He scooped Callie's limp, broken body into his arms. She was so incredibly light, feeling like nothing more than shattered bird bones and wet wool. As he lifted her, her head lolled back against his bicep, and he saw the faint, fading pulse fluttering at her neck. She was clinging to life by a thread. Cedric ran. He bypassed the servants' quarters and carried her directly into the royal wing, kicking open the doors to his own private chambers. He laid her gently on his massive, fur-covered bed, ruining the expensive silks with her blood. Dr. Arthur Pendleton, the pack's chief healer, burst into the room moments later, his medical bags clutched in his hands. Arthur was a seasoned veteran, but even he paled at the sight of the 4 arrows. "Out, sire. Everyone out," Arthur ordered, already tearing away the remains of Callie's ruined dress. "I am not leaving," Cedric growled, his alpha aura flaring violently, filling the room with suffocating pressure. "Then hold her down," Arthur snapped back, immune to the king's dominance in his operating room. "These are barbed mercenary bolts. If I pull them out, she bleeds to death. I have to push them through." For the next 2 hours, the royal bedchamber became a nightmare of blood, sweat, and horrific sounds. Cedric, the most powerful man in the kingdom, found himself holding the frail hands of a scullery maid, his own heart pounding with a frantic, unexplainable terror. Every time Arthur pushed an arrow through, Callie's body seized, a silent, agonizing scream tearing from her unconscious lips. Cedric fed her his own blood, slicing his palm and pressing it to her mouth, praying the potent healing properties of an alpha would keep her heart beating. Finally, the last arrow clattered into a metal basin. Arthur stood back, his arms coated in blood up to the elbows, his chest heaving. He immediately began stitching the massive, jagged wounds, packing them with healing herbs. "She lost too much blood, Cedric," Arthur whispered heavily, stepping back to wipe his brow. "Her wolf is dormant, likely starved from years of malnourishment. She isn't healing like one of us. She's healing like a human." Cedric stared at Callie's ghostly face. He reached out, his large, calloused thumb gently wiping a smear of blood from her cheek. "She saved my son, Arthur. She saved my entire world. Do whatever it takes." Arthur walked over to the metal basin, picking up one of the bloodied arrows with a pair of iron tongs. He brought it close to the candlelight, sniffing the blackened tip. The healer's face drained of what little color it had left. "My king." Arthur's voice shook. "Look at the metal." Cedric stepped closer. Where the silver should have been gleaming under the gore, the metal was pitted and stained with a sickly, iridescent green residue. "Wolfsbane," Cedric hissed, his eyes flashing gold. "Not just any wolfsbane," Arthur said softly, fear radiating from him. "This is mountain ash wolfsbane. It's highly refined, designed to slow the heart until it stops. It doesn't grow in the wild, sire." Cedric's blood ran cold. He knew exactly what Arthur was implying. Mountain ash wolfsbane was a strictly controlled substance, cultivated only in one place in the entire territory: the royal glasshouse, the very place the assassins had ambushed Callie and Leo. The mercenaries hadn't just gotten lucky. They were let in. They were supplied. Someone inside his inner circle, someone he trusted, had orchestrated the assassination of his son. Before Cedric could process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal, the heart monitor Arthur had hooked up to Callie began to shriek. A long, continuous, terrifying tone filled the room. "She's crashing," Arthur shouted, diving back to the bed, his hands glowing with the faint, magical energy of a pack healer as he pressed them to Callie's chest. "The poison has reached her heart." Cedric froze, watching the woman who had sacrificed everything slip away into the dark. A deafening silence fell over the castle, save for the desperate, continuous wail of the machine, as the Alpha King realized his nightmare was only just beginning. The piercing, continuous wail of the heart monitor echoed off the stone walls of the royal bedchamber, a sound that threatened to shatter King Cedric Alden's sanity. "Doctor." Arthur Pendleton pumped Callie's chest with frantic, glowing hands, his magical energy fighting a losing battle against the refined mountain ash wolfsbane coursing through her veins. "I'm losing her, sire," Arthur yelled over the machine's agonizing shriek. "Her wolf is too weak. It can't fight the venom." Cedric's mind went blank. He looked at the pale, broken girl who had thrown her fragile body over his son, taking the death meant for the royal line. He thought of the empty, suffocating grief that had consumed him since his wife's passing, and the sheer terror he had felt holding little Leo's blood-soaked clothes. Callie Hughes had spared him from an eternity of madness. He would not let her fade into the dark. "Step back, Arthur," Cedric rumbled. The command wasn't a request. It was a physical force, laced with the ancient, commanding dominance of an Alpha King. Arthur stumbled backward, his hands falling to his sides. "My king, you cannot." Cedric didn't listen. He climbed onto the bloodied mattress and knelt beside Callie's still form. He extended his right wrist and, without a second of hesitation, sank his own elongated fangs into his flesh. Warm, golden-hued alpha blood welled to the surface, thrumming with raw, primal power. He pried Callie's blue lips apart and pressed his bleeding wrist to her mouth, forcing the blood down her throat. Then, he slammed his massive, scarred hand flat against her chest, directly over her heart. I, Cedric Alden, Alpha of Iron Ridge Keep, invoke the ancient rites of the Blood Oath. Cedric chanted, his voice vibrating with a frequency that made the very air in the room hum. I bind my life to yours. My strength is your strength. My breath is your breath. Return to me. Return. For a agonizing 10 seconds, nothing happened. The monitor continued its flatline scream. Arthur bowed his head in defeat. Then, Callie's spine arched violently off the mattress. A sharp, ragged gasp tore from her throat as Cedric's potent blood hit her system like a bolt of lightning. The monitor spiked, beeping wildly as her heart kick-started with ferocious speed. The horrific, jagged wounds on her shoulders, ribs, and thighs began to emit a faint, golden steam. The flesh was knitting together, not at the sluggish pace of a human, but with the accelerated, ferocious power of an awakened wolf. Cedric collapsed back against the headboard, his chest heaving, his own life force drained by the monumental transfer of energy. He watched in awe as the sickly blue tint faded from Callie's skin, replaced by a healthy, flushed warmth. By the goddess, Arthur whispered, quickly checking her vitals. She's stable. The poison. Your blood incinerated it, Cedric, but her spine. The fourth arrow shattered her L4 vertebra. The bone is regenerating, but I don't know if the nerve damage can be reversed. She may never walk again. Cedric gently brushed a stray lock of brown hair from Callie's sleeping face. She will have the finest caretakers in the realm. If she cannot walk, I will carry her myself. He stood up, the exhaustion in his eyes instantly replaced by a terrifying, cold fury. Keep her heavily guarded, Arthur. Nobody enters this room but you and the prince. I have a castle to purge. Leaving the royal suite, Cedric summoned Gideon Hayes, his ruthless spy master. Gideon was a lean, scarred wolf who operated in the shadows, and his loyalty to the crown was absolute. The assassins were led into the glass house, Cedric stated, walking briskly down the stone corridors, the blood still drying on his skin. The wolfsbane on the arrows was refined from our own stores. Someone opened the gates. Gideon's jaw tightened. Who knew the prince would be in the glass house tonight? Beatrice, Cedric growled. She directed Callie there to keep Leo away from the feast. Within minutes, the elderly head servant was dragged down to the dungeons. The damp, torchlit cell was freezing, but Beatrice was sweating profusely, weeping before the king had even asked a question. I didn't know, my king. I swear on my life, I didn't know. Beatrice sobbed, throwing herself at Cedric's boots. He told me to send the boy there. He said it was for his own safety because the Great Hall was too rowdy. Who? Cedric roared, his golden eyes flashing in the dim light. Who gave the order? Beatrice looked up, her face twisted in terror. Lord Silas, sire, the beta. He gave the order, and he demanded the key to the botanical stores yesterday. He threatened to have my family exiled if I spoke a word. Cedric felt a physical blow to his gut. Silas Croft, his right-hand man, the man who had fought by his side in a dozen wars. If Leo died, and Cedric, consumed by grief, stepped down or perished, Silas was next in line for the throne. It was a classic, brutal coup, masked as a tragic mercenary attack. Lock her in the highest tower, Cedric ordered Gideon, his voice a deadly, calm whisper. And assemble the Alpha Guard. We are hunting a traitor. The castle was eerily silent, save for the howling blizzard battering the stone walls outside. Silas Croft, the beta wolf and second in command, moved like a phantom through the opulent, shadowed corridors of the royal wing. His heart hammered a frantic, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The courtyard ambush had been a spectacular failure. Instead of the young prince's blood soaking the snow, it was the blood of a worthless scullery maid. Worse, His own mercenaries had been slaughtered by the king before they could flee the grounds. Now, panic gnawed at Silas's gut. He had heard the frantic whispers among the palace guards the maid had miraculously survived. King Cedric had invoked the ancient blood oath. If Callie Hughes awoke, she might remember the faint, distinct scent of rotting pine and deadened ash on the man who had handed the assassins the botanical store's key just hours prior. Silas could not allow a single loose end to unravel his meticulously planned coup. He slipped past the heavy oak doors of the royal bedchamber. The room was bathed in the warm, flickering glow of the hearth, smelling strongly of bitter poultices, copper, and the undeniable, oppressive scent of Cedric's alpha dominance. Dr. Arthur Pendleton was nowhere to be seen, likely sequestered in his apothecary, mixing fresh herbs to battle the lingering effects of the wolfsbane. On the massive, silk-draped bed lay Callie. Her chest rose and fell in a steady, deep rhythm, anchored by the continuous pulsing of a medical monitor. Silas crept closer, his boots making no sound on the thick, woven rugs. A tragedy, Silas sneered quietly, his voice barely a breath over the crackling fire. He reached down, pulling a heavy, gold-tasseled velvet pillow from the adjacent sofa. To survive 4 arrows, only to succumb to your injuries in the night. He stepped up to the edge of the mattress. As he raised the velvet cushion, he hesitated for a fraction of a second. Beneath the bloodied bandages, Callie's pale skin was radiating a faint, almost imperceptible golden luminescence. The sheer, raw power of the Alpha's blood was actively rewriting her biology, pulling her dormant, starved wolf from the darkest, most suppressed depths of her soul. Shaking off his sudden unease, Silas lunged, slamming the heavy pillow brutally down over Callie's face. He leaned his considerable weight into it, determined to smother the last breath from her lungs. Beneath the crushing velvet, Callie's mind, previously floating in a dark, medically induced void, suddenly exploded into a storm of fire and ice. The suffocating lack of oxygen triggered a violent, primal survival instinct that years of abuse and starvation had kept buried. But this time, it wasn't just human panic. The alpha blood coursing through her veins acted as a volatile catalyst. It burned through her system like liquid sun. Suddenly, a sickening, deafening crack echoed through the quiet room. It was the horrific, miraculous sound of Callie's shattered L4 vertebra violently and forcefully snapping back into perfect alignment as the ancient magic forced her body to heal. Her eyes snapped open beneath the pillow, glowing a brilliant, piercing, unearthly silver. Silas felt an unnatural, blistering heat radiating from the fragile girl beneath him. Before he could react to the sudden shift in the air, Callie's arm shot upward. The hand that had spent years scrubbing stone floors had morphed, expanding into a massive, heavily furred paw tipped with razor-sharp, lethal claws. With a roar that sounded far more beast than human, Callie slashed blindly upward. Her claws tore cleanly through the thick velvet pillow, sending a cloud of feathers exploding into the air, and caught Silas squarely across the chest. The beta howled in sudden agony, stumbling backward as 4 deep, bloody parallel lines opened across his torso. Callie didn't hesitate. She tumbled wildly out of the high bed, landing gracefully on all 4s on the stone floor. She didn't collapse. Her newly mended legs held her weight perfectly. Right before Silas's terrified eyes, the small, broken scullery maid rapidly and fluidly transformed into a magnificent, sleek, silver-furred timber wolf. She was smaller than a typical warrior wolf, but her musculature was dense, and her silver eyes burned with the protective, feral fury of a mother defending her territory. Silas, realizing his life was now dangling by a thread, abandoned all stealth. His bones popped and cracked loudly as he rapidly shifted, taking on his own monstrous, hulking brown-furred form. He lunged at her with a guttural snarl, his massive jaws aiming straight for her throat, intending to snap her neck before the guards could hear the commotion. But Callie was impossibly fast, fueled by adrenaline, instinct, and the residual alpha magic singing in her veins. She ducked beneath his heavy, clumsy attack, using his own momentum against him. As Silas crashed into a heavy oak armoire, splintering the antique wood, Callie leaped onto his exposed back. She sank her powerful, bone-crushing jaws deep into the thick muscle at the nape of his neck. Silas thrashed wildly, smashing her repeatedly into the stone walls and shattering glass lamps, but Callie held on with a relentless death grip. her teeth severed muscle and tendon, forcing the much larger wolf to his knees in a pool of his own blood. The heavy chamber doors burst open with a resounding crash. King Cedric, Gideon Hayes, and a dozen heavily armed elite guards flooded into the room. Swords and silver-tipped spears drawn. Cedric froze in his tracks, his heart stopping in his chest. His treacherous beta was bleeding profusely on the floor, helplessly pinned beneath a stunning, radiant silver wolf whose beautiful fur was matted with gore. The silver wolf slowly released her grip on Silas's unconscious, shifting body. She turned her head, looking up through the settling cloud of pillow feathers. The golden, commanding gaze of the Alpha King met the fierce, glowing silver gaze of the Luna, and in that split second, the entire room seemed to lose all oxygen. The blood oath hadn't just saved Callie's life. It had forged an ancient, unbreakable mate bond, awakening her true potential and recognizing her as his equal. Slowly, the silver wolf stepped off the fallen traitor. Her chest heaving, she began the painful process of shifting back. Moments later, Callie knelt on the cold stone floor, her human form restored. She was naked, shivering, and entirely healed, save for 4 distinct, star-shaped scars forever branded on her back where the arrows had struck. She kept her head bowed, staring at the floor, waiting for the king's swift execution for daring to attack and maim a high-ranking noble. Instead, the sound of heavy boots approached. Cedric walked toward her, shrugging off his massive, heavy fur cloak. He dropped to his knees right there on the blood-stained floor, ignoring the gasps of his guards. He wrapped the thick, warm fur gently around her trembling shoulders, pulling it tight to protect her dignity and ward off the cold. He didn't see a bruised, lowly servant. He saw the savior of his only son, the fierce vanquisher of the rot within his court, and the missing half of his soul. Cedric reached out, his calloused fingers gently lifting her chin so she had to look at him. "You bow to no one." "Callie Hughes," Cedric whispered fiercely, his voice thick with emotion as he pressed his forehead against hers, the newly forged mate bond singing a triumphant, soaring melody in their blood. Not today, not ever again. From a forgotten scullery maid bleeding in the snow to the revered Luna of Iron Ridge Keep, Callie's sacrifice rewrote the history of the pack. She didn't just save a prince, she healed a broken king and rooted out a deep rot within the court. The 4 scars on her back remained, forever serving as a testament to the night a mother's heart forged an empire's greatest queen.